First, the White House, at the request of the Vice President, is asking the Joint Chiefs of Staff to draw up new plans for a possible attack on Iran, according to a new article in the New Yorker magazine. That's not the first time we're hearing the administration is getting ready for a war with Iran. But according to the article by Seymour Hersh, the plans are real and they're changing.
There's been a real campaign. The White House has sort of shifted, even in public. You can sort of sense it. You can actually track it. They can't sell the nuclear, that Iran's a nuclear threat. That just didn't work. The American public did not buy it.
Earlier in the summer, the plan focused on a bombing attack targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. But now, according to Hersh, the plans emphasize, quote, surgical strikes on Revolutionary Guard core facilities. That's the part of Iran's military the Senate voted last week to classify as a terror organization. My take. I simply cannot believe that a war with Iran is really on the horizon. Yes, it's been discussed. Yes, some in the administration are probably reckless enough to do it with little provocation. And yes, just in case, preparations are being made. But it is hard to believe, with what's going on in Iraq, that a real war with Iran is on the table. Furthermore, the only possible reason to start a war would be to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. So the notion that surgical strikes against the Revolutionary Guard is the latest strategy is mind-boggling and scary. Joining me now, Steve Clemons, Senior Director of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation, a nonpartisan think tank. Pat Buchanan, MSNBC political analyst, joins us as well. All right, thanks to both of you, appreciate it. All right, Steve, look, Pat and I have talked about this. Pat thinks it is real. Are you telling me that this is real, the real possibility of war with Iran on the horizon?
Well, I think there's a possibility of war on the horizon, but what I've written and been saying, in contrast to Pat, is that the president's not there yet. The president's showing a diversity of options. Some of them have teeth, and frankly, there's a lot of diplomatic, economic, and other options on the table as well. And I just don't believe this is an Iraq replay. I think that there's plenty of time yet to see how this plays out. And the president's being tough in some areas, but you know, there are other avenues to take. And I'm a critic of this president. I've been very robust, but I just don't see in his posture the fact that we're already on a predetermined course to bomb Iran.
And that's kind of my position. Pat, you disagree?
Mm-hmm. No, I don't. I don't think he's made the execute decision yet. But I do think that, as Cy Hersh writes, and we've been talking, Dan, I think they've changed the targets from the nuclear sites to the Al-Quds forces that are aiding the insurgents in Iraq. So they claim in killing Americans, because that's an understandable target to Americans. And frankly, I think the president get a lot of support if he did it. I think the expectation then would be that Iran would retaliate, and that's when you'd go after their nuclear sites. But so I do agree with Steve. I don't think the final decision has been made.
Just so we understand, Pat, because it seems to me that the only real way to go after Iran is to claim it's based on the nuclear facilities. And it sounds like Cy Hersh's article is saying, look, the American public wasn't behind it. So what you're saying is that they're going to kind of do it slowly, but with clearly the end goal being to get the nuclear facilities? I'm
saying that my expectation would be, if there's any attack, it will come on the Quds force, directly on them, the ones that are providing the enhanced IEDs. But you don't have to be very bright to expect retaliation from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, maybe against Americans in Afghanistan, maybe terrorism down the coast. And when that happens, then you go up the escalator. The next move would be on those nuclear facilities. I would be astonished if it didn't proceed that way.
Rachel Maddow joins us now as well from Air America Radio. Rachel, you and I have talked about this. We talked about it with Pat in the past. I'm with Steve on this one. It is hard for me to believe that this is real. Yeah, sure, you can put plans together. You can consider what-if scenarios. But the notion that we're sort of on our way to a war with Iran without anything else changing in terms of what we know is hard for me to believe.
Well, it's hard for all of us to see inside the internal deliberations at the White House, and Cy Hersh has as good a sources as anybody does, it seems, on issues like this. There's one observable political external factor that I think makes me worry more about this than Steve and Pat are saying we ought to be worried about and that you're saying, and that is the involvement of this group Freedom's Watch, which is this newly formed right-wing group that put out these $15 million worth of TV ads reports, which essentially asserted that Iraq was behind 9/11. Their next thing that they're doing is that they are moving on in their PR efforts to try to sell Iran as a threat to the United States. And that sort of White House, disconnected from the White House, but allied with the White House PR effort, to me looks like
Rachel,
a lead up to the Iraq war.
You can argue that Iran is a threat to the United States, and yet we still don't need a preemptive war.
But
right?
that won't be what these guys argue. These guys will say, and so we've got to bomb them yesterday.
All right, here's what the White House response, the spokesperson Dan Abrams was asked about this at the press conference today.
The president has said that he believes that there is a diplomatic solution that we can use to solve the Iranian problem, and that's why we're working with our allies to get there.
That's what I said before we went to Iraq, too.
I'm not going to comment on any possible scenario that an anonymous source, continues to feed into Cy Hersh.
Yeah, okay, but that's not a denial, Steve. I want to hear a denial, Steve.
Well, there's no denial. I mean, what we have in this case is, frankly, what Rachel is lined up and what Cy Hersh, whom I greatly respect, is lined up is what any president should be doing is basically looking at various plans for dealing with a problematic nation. But what we see on the hyperventilation in the right about this issue, and I take Pat Buchanan out of that, but the hyperventilation on the right, that would not be happening if they enjoyed the full confidence and support of the president on this decision. He's not there yet. He's nowhere near it, in my view. And frankly, I just talked to Nick Burns the other day, our Undersecretary of State, who's negotiating these third round of sanctions. We've just done a deal with the Chinese and Russians that says we're going to wait until the IAEA plays out its game, until Javier Solana plays out its game, and with Europe and Iran, before we even draft a third round of resolutions on Iran.
Let me talk about the Al-Quds force. One of the problems here is the president is painting himself into a corner. General Petraeus says they're fighting a proxy war against us. The generals say our guys are being killed. Lieberman says our guys are being killed. The president says they're sending this stuff in there when he spoke to the American Legion Convention. Dan, he's painting himself into a corner. And whatever you say about George Bush, he's not a bluffer. If they don't stop sending these IEDs in there, then George Bush either hits them or people are going to start accusing him of backing down.
But part of it, Rachel, is going to be how you frame it, meaning we're only going to find out about a lot of this if the administration decides to release the information, right?
Right, that's exactly right.
We're going to get our information from them. So if they decide to make this a central case, they will. If they decide to deal with it, privately and aggressively, they can do that as well.
Yeah, the distance between what Steve is saying and what Pat is saying is that Steve is usually right, but an optimistic guy. And I know this because I like Steve and I read his blog every day. But he's talking about a process that would be rational. What Pat is talking about is what Seymour Hersh is talking about, and which is the whole idea that the rationale for invading Iran will change according to whatever political reality they need to cram it into in order to get justification for doing it. And they're going to do it no matter how irrational it is. That's the picture that Seymour Hersh is painting. Yeah. That's why it's so scary, because it is irrational.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I said this before when we talked about it. I'll say it again. I think this is probably the most important story of the day, and we'll continue to cover it. Steve Clemons, Rachel Maddow, and Pat Buchanan, stay with us.